All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar in honor of National Make a Will Month. I shared in the invitation to this that more than 70% of Americans don't have a plan, and hams are no exception to that. And so hopefully we'll have an opportunity today to give you some thoughts about how you can start making a plan for yourself and how your station might be unique in making a plan versus another person who's making arrangements for their final estate. I'll mention a few housekeeping items for the webinar today. You'll notice a Q&A box in your webinar screen where you can post some questions. I actually posted an introduction in there a little while ago. So feel free during the webinar to share any questions that you might have. I'll have my contact information on the last slide, and you can always reach out to us at development@arrl.org in case there's something that didn't get covered during the live portion today, and always happy to have a conversation or help wherever we can. There's a raise hand button in case you do have a question. We'll maybe do some interactions at the end of the webinar. If you have some something you'd like to bring up when a slide is up, just post in that Q&A, and we'll try to get it covered while we're talking. While one of us is talking, Dino or I will pass it over to each other if a question comes in there. And I also have another colleague on the line as well, monitoring those questions there. So I'll do a quick introduction about myself. Presenting to you today are two of us. My name is Kevin Beal, over there on the right side, K8EAL. I'm Director of Development here at ARRL headquarters. I spent a good part of my career in higher education, supporting both educational programs and alumni relations and fundraising and development, which is what brought me here to ARRL. And happy to just be supporting a team here in this office who works really hard to try to make sure that we have the resources at national headquarters to do all the things that the organization needs for its strategy in our second century, and hopefully to prepare us for our third century in those out years. I'm going to pass it over to my good friend here, Dino, who's going to talk a little bit about himself and then move us into the rest of the presentation. Over to you, Dino.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Kevin, and thanks to the ARRL for doing this. I've made this presentation about silent key estate planning to, I think, about 8 or 9 other clubs over the last few years, and it's always been a thought-provoking thing, and I hope that's what it'll be for you tonight. Just a quick shout out to one of the attendees, who's a friend of mine, Mike W0MNE, is out there somewhere in the ether. Hello, Mike. The discussion topic tonight is something that unfortunately doesn't, I saw those clapped hands, unfortunately doesn't get a lot of attention. But the bottom line up front is, what happens to all of our beloved ham gear when that inevitable day comes along when we become a silent key? All of us will invariably or inevitably become a silent key, and unfortunately that day may arrive unexpectedly. So we need to prepare ahead of time to make it as simple as possible for our families to dispose of our equipment at that time in a timely manner once their grieving process is over with and no longer overwhelming to them. We also want to try and maximize the monetary return to them or your donation of your equipment and ham materials to other folks and other organizations. Next slide. I'm sure you can probably all read this, and you may be able to relate to this as well. And go on to the next one. And probably these slides are really kind of funny in their own way, but it may not be really far off from the mark for many of us. Next slide. Go ahead, Kevin. There you go. Some of you may have been aware of George Ohm W9 EVT, who is now a silent key, but he had probably the most extensive ham radio collection of gear of anybody. And when he passed away, I hope he had some kind of plan in place for the disposition of all that equipment. And if he had an XYL or a YL, then hopefully that plan was really supporting her. But I have a sneaking suspicion from some things that I've read on Groups.io that may very well not have been the case. Next slide. I think I saw this in electric radio here a few minutes ago, but you may be able to see that this might sound a little bit familiar to you. And go ahead to the next slide. Just real quick, a little bit about me. I started off in high school 55 years ago, I think, is when I got my license. And I actually am still in touch with some of the ham radio operators that were in that high school club. I went on to get a BS in electrical engineering and was commissioned a second lieutenant of infantry. It's a little far off from electrical engineering, but that's what I did for 26 years. My first Army assignment was to Fort Richardson, Alaska, and that's where I met the beautiful lady pictured there, who is my wife, Toby, and also she is KL0SS. And we had lots of assignments in the continental United States and Alaska a couple of times. Retired at the end of 2001, and now we live in Williamsburg, Virginia, amongst a bunch of other retirees here in the area. Next slide. Well, hobbyists collect stuff. Philatelists collect stamps. Model train enthusiasts build their big layouts and have different gauges and even collect different engines and brass engines and cars. Numismatists collect coins. Amateur astronomers have telescopes and all of the gear that goes along with that. And then finally, and I can never pronounce this correctly, but it's panopictographists, I think. And that's people who collect comic books. And unfortunately, that's another thing that I have a very large comic book collection that I have to figure out how to dispose of when I become a silent key, along with all of the ham radio equipment. Next slide. Hams also collect stuff: radios, new and boat anchors, accessories, teletype machines, computer gear, towers and antennas, test equipment and components, QSL cards, and all those other things that fill up our shack, our attic space, and our garages. So how are we going to deal with all of this stuff? Next slide. Back in April of 2018, Noel Beardsley, K8NB, wrote an article that should resonate, pun intended, with those of us who are facing the fall and winter of our lives. Not Kevin, he's still got color in his hair. Or as one man said once, there are more days behind us than there are in front of us. And Noel emphasized that we really need to create a list, an inventory, a good inventory of all of our equipment. That's a good article to start with, and you can get there from the ARRL's collection of QST magazines. Next slide. Having been involved in a number of silent key estate dispositions, helping families over the year, I wanted to really expand on my experience. And I wrote an article for QST that was in the September 2019 issue. I wanted to expand on what Noel had put out, but also wanted to share and examine the larger issue of how we can best assist our own family and those of our ham friends if we have to become involved in their estates. And that's when they are faced with dispensing of the loved one's equipment and materials, which can be really, really tough. Next slide. I like organized. If you look in the dictionary next to obsessive compulsive disorder, you will see my picture. My wife is at the other end of the spectrum, by the way, so we get along very well. Next slide. So I like to organize, and as you can see from these pictures of our shack and workbench, that I guess I deserve the OCD title, often much to the chagrin of my better half, Toby. So what I've done is I've tried to organize our significant collection of ham radio stuff to make it easier for that inevitable time that one or both of us become silent keys. So tonight, let's talk about some of the things that you can do, things that are useful both now and in the future, helping the people handling your ham radio estate. And we'll also talk about helping other ham families' estates as well. So organize, get the materials all together, receipts, original packing, repair records in a centralized location, as Noel Beardsley, KNB, recommends. Of course, the price that you assign to each piece of equipment that may be 40 or 50 years old is not going to be current, although some of that equipment can be 2, 3, sometimes 10 times the cost. But it would also be useful for you for insurance purposes if you haven't done that already. Consider keeping an electronic copy or a paper copy in your safe deposit box, as well as at your house as well. Next slide. So you have to agree, we all have to agree that we have an expiration date. So preparing ahead of time is really important. I'll touch on just a little bit of non-ham items here for a moment. Do you have a will? Do you have a living trust if it's appropriate? Do you have powers of attorney in place, medical powers of attorney in place, medical directives for your care? And what do I mean by a front door medical binder? I can't take credit for this. I read about it in the internet. Everything's true on the internet a couple of years ago, and it's simply a binder that resides next to the front door that has copies of our military ID cards, our Medicare cards, a list of our prescriptions, because every time you go to the doctor, they always want to know again what it is you're taking. And have that there, and anything else you think might be important. So when you inevitably get carted out the front door in an ambulance on the way to the ER, ask me how I know. You have all of that information in one place. And that actually worked out really well. The medic in the truck was really surprised. I just handed him this thing and there's all of the stuff. And then we handed it to the doctor in the ER. So they knew exactly what prescriptions I was taking, so on and so forth. But more importantly, for ham radio purposes, do you have someone identified who will help your family with your ham radio estate? Next slide. Everyone's situation is different. Do you have a plan to dispose of all your hobby stuff, whether it's ham radio or stamps or coins or, for my case, comic books? A plan that lets you decide ahead of time how you want the ham part of your estate to be handled. Hams who have prearranged the disposal of their equipment stand the best chance, I think, of making sure that their wishes are followed and that their family recoups a reasonable amount from the sales of their items if they want to do that. You may be in a position, you may want to just donate everything to either your club or to some organization. Choose a friend, a trusted friend, because your family may very well not know who your ham radio friends are. We had a ham here in town who became a silent key. He had that meeting with a friend, and once he unfortunately passed away, his gear went to individuals, and then the rest of it was sold, and the proceeds were then given to his widow. So it was all taken care of beforehand so that the widow would know what to do afterwards, because that trusted friend was in place. And once you pick that person, have a meeting with them. Make sure your family decision makers, whoever those folks are there, and your friend, and just talk about what it is going to happen when you become a silent key. And then document that plan and have it in place for both your family and for that friend. Create a file or a binder or an electronic file or a Word document or whatever with important ham documents that you have and info that your friends and family know where that document is for that inevitable day when you become a silent key. And this is really going to sound weird, so hang on to your hats, but think about writing your own obituary. I know that sounds strange, but who knows more about you than you? So think about that. And over to Kevin.
Thanks so much, Dino. ARRL wanted to try to find a way where we could be helpful to our members and the broader community of hams. And in 2023, just over a year ago, we launched the ARRL Estate Planning Workbook. And that's available to you today to download. The URL is right on that page right there. You don't have to be a member in order to access the workbook or the pages or the tools within it. And it's pretty exciting to know that some of the pieces that Dino is talking about right now are included as pages that are prepared as forms that you should be able to just fill in. So again, this is something that's available for all hams. I'd encourage you to share it with others who aren't on the webinar today and members in your club. And I'll also mention that if a presentation like this might be helpful for you or your club in the future, to just reach out and let me know. And there's no pride in having to do something like this again. And I'm happy to help wherever I can. Do see a question over there in the chat. I have a couple more slides to go through, but Bruce, why don't I try to let you talk if you're available? Go ahead. If you're not able to, I'll just move on. You can also type your question in the chat. All right, I'll move on for now, and then we can maybe circle back with you if you're.
Wait a minute, I got it.
All right, go ahead.
I noticed in the suffix of the link, the suffix is OR. Is that a mistake, or should it be ORG?
You are correct. That it's a typo on this end. It's ARRL.org/estate planning workbook. Great eye on there, and I apologize for the typo.
Thank you.
All righty. All right, so on to the important page here. So the cover there obviously has spots where you can fill out your name and call sign. It's helpful because there's detail in here to indicate when you prepared the information inside the book. That might change over time. And also, if there's preferences on there and what you would like done with it, it's not a bad idea to have documents that are signed. This might be incorporated or something that you would append to your estate plan, or include, actually, like as Dino had mentioned, in your safety box, or also in near where your ham radio equipment is. But the most important page, and I'll mention a couple of the other ones within the book here, is this trusted assistance. Dino talked about this, including who your executor is, but that's those helper lines, or a specialist, if you have specialized equipment, is extremely invaluable for a surviving spouse or a family member, maybe an adult child who's dealing with an issue here, or even a neighbor who could be a friend who's called upon to look over some of your final affairs. You can imagine the amateur radio equipment and everything from antennas to transceivers to amplifiers could look pretty foreign. And just knowing that there's somebody that you trusted who understands what your plans are, that can help and advise through that, could be invaluable to them. So you don't leave them doing it on their own. Remember, this plan isn't something that you do for yourself. This is something that you're doing for your loved ones and for others. And that's why that one's the most important page. Okay, so this gets a little bit closer to the meat of what the book is. On the website that was mentioned there, in the corrected URL, so thanks again for calling that out, is downloadable individual pages that are form fillable too. So in the physical copy of the book, you can handwrite all these things. You can print out the entire book and staple it together and fill it out by hand, or you can type them in as well if you have handwriting like mine. I probably should have gone to medical school considering how bad my handwriting is, but I ended up in this line of work, and that just means that the letters I sign for our donors and others just have a little bit more scribbling to it than I would like. But you can fill them out here. There's some basic and good information on here, like item numbers for that's your own inventory, but manufacturer numbers and models, descriptions, a detailed description. I'm going to redesign this at some point and put a little spot here exactly where a photograph might go, because I think that would be helpful on one of these pages if you have a picture. this all helps with insurance information as well. So you might already have something like this put together for if you have ARRL insurance or another insurer. It's just a helpful thing to be able to do in the inventory. On the right-hand side, you'll see this list here, and there's a couple of different ones within the book. There's a list of items to be given away. There might be something that's a transceiver of yours that somebody else might really be able to benefit from, or a local school club, or something that you'd like to just give away. And that's absolutely fine. You put that on there and who it's going to go or what the alternative is. There's also a list of things that you'd like to be sold. You know, something might have some good value with it. Maybe you have a 705 that you barely touched, or 7300 or FTDX10. That's a nice piece of equipment out there that somebody could sell. That's great, and that could come back to your estate or be used for another purpose. That's something that you would want to indicate what your intent was. This is something that that has some value. There's one list that isn't included here, but I think is also really important for those loved ones. Remember, because you're doing this for them and not for you, and that's items that can be disposed of or thrown away. There's definitely stuff in your collection, definitely things in mine that have great meaning to me and only me. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have much value for somebody else. You don't want to get rid of it now, but at some point you're going to want to. And that's important agency to be giving to a loved one, to let them know that while you cherish this one piece, that when it becomes time, that you can get rid of that as well. Sometimes you might want something donated as well. So if you're going to donate something, ARRL has a program as well where we call it the ARRL Legacy Circle. Dino and Toby are members. Thank you so much for making a commitment and support for that. We have a list of other members who are in the Legacy Circle that we publish in QST and are in the annual report, and also get an invitation to our annual donor recognition reception as part of Dayton Hamvention, where somebody has indicated that they want to contribute to amateur radio and ARRL as part of their final estate. You could imagine how difficult it would be for ARRL to collect the physical equipment of a silent key. But in the estate planning workbook, and Dino will speak to this a little bit later on, are a couple of advisors who can help with the disposition of some equipment if you wanted the proceeds of those to go toward an amateur radio cause, be it a club or be it ARRL. And if that's something that you're considering, of course, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that, but I wanted to mention it. And if you are hoping to support an amateur radio cause, there's lots of ways to do that. Everything that ARRL does in unrestricted programs to Spectrum Defense, our education and outreach program, which is a key pillar in our strategy. Here, you might have seen that as a result from the July board meeting, where protect and promote, but supporting the future of amateur radio with STEM education is so critical. I'll also mention that ARRL from time to time receives very generous estate gifts that come in without any designation. And the board has made a long time ago a very smart decision that any undesignated gifts, if there isn't a designation to it, it goes into an endowment. So that income from that generated supports amateur radio and ARRL in the future. And so I think that's a very smart decision. But if you were planning on making a contribution to ARRL or any organization for that matter, you might want to consider how you would want that used. And of course, with regard to ARRL, I'm always happy to give thoughts and advise on that. So I'll stop here. If there's questions that come up, I can answer, but I'm going to pass it over to Dino.
Okay. I don't see any hands raised. And I just want to follow up and say Kevin is a good arm twister for getting people to donate. And seriously, Toby and I have planned on making the ARRL part of our estate, as he mentioned, and we also make an annual donation to the ARRL as well. So we're blessed to be in a position to be able to do that, and it makes us feel good too. We also donate to the hospital system that's taken care of us over the years as well. Okay, let's talk about getting rid of this stuff ahead of time, or pre-disposal. What do I mean by the calculus of time? It's just, hey, look out into the future and imagine how your days may play out, and how over time you're going to divest yourself of all your beloved equipment. Does it make sense to downsize now or later? Selling your excess equipment is one course of action. Yes, having 2 extra HF radios does give you tremendous backup, but realistically, do you need them now? But here's the disclaimer. If you remember those pictures of our shack, pay no attention to my shack where I have several HF radios. So you could donate to your club. You could sell the equipment and give the proceeds to the club. We've had several members in our club do that. Try and keep your stuff local. If you've got some of the more recent ARRL books, for example, your local library might be able to take those in if your club hasn't already provided one of the ARRL book sets to them. The message to you, though, is think about it ahead of time and take whatever action that you think is appropriate ahead of time. You could take stuff to Hamfests. There are lots of for sale lists around. There's auctions. Kevin mentioned the ARRL insurance, but bottom line, plan and act ahead of time. Next slide. Kevin mentioned a couple of buyers and sellers. Again, everyone's situation is really different. Having one of these companies come in and take whatever it is you want to give to them is another course of action. It's probably not necessarily going to maximize the return on your equipment to the family, but often there's a real benefit in having a one and done. Good friend of ours who became a Silent Key a couple of years ago had one of ththese companies, and there are more than just these two. You'll see these, I believe, in QST advertising. But he had them come in. He had an 80-foot Roan 45 tower with big Yagis on top. He had them come in, and they took all of that and most of his gear. He kept an HF transceiver, an amplifier, and had a simple wire antenna. And when he unfortunately did pass away, I took that equipment and rehabbed it and sold it and then gave the proceeds to our club. That was his desire. He told me that ahead of time, and that's what we did. So one and done can be a viable course of action, but once again, probably not going to get the maximum return to the money. And that may very well not really be important to you either. Next slide. A lot of us with gray hair who move into retirement communities or assisted living, that type thing, because you do that and you no longer can have your 80-foot tower and antennas on top, doesn't mean that you can't continue to operate. Of course, you get VHF and UHF, excuse me, operations, which are easy to do. But there's also a real, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. There's also several of these organizations that will allow you to operate remotely over the internet. And it's kind of expensive depending on what you sign up for. But having said that, you might be paying for your operation by the minute or a subscription or something like that. But on the other hand, you've divested yourself of all that other antennas and towers, and you've hopefully gotten some money back for that. And then you can apply it to something like this. And some of these stations are really, really impressive. So the message is you can sit in your condominium or your townhouse where you can't have an antenna and still be a force to be considered on HF via one of these stations. Next slide. There are some things that you need to do once you do become, or your family is going to need to do once you do become a Silent Key. Of course, there's the host of non-ham notifications that need to be done, death certificates and all of that. One ham during one of my presentations said that you really need to be careful about canceling a mobile phone because there may be a lot of information in that phone, and you don't want to just do away with it willy-nilly before you take care of that kind of thing. Your family should know how to cancel your license with the FCC or transfer your call sign to another family member, for example. We had a local YL who was on our morning coffee and radio net that's every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. And she came on with her call sign and mentioned that her father had been a ham. And I said, did you think about getting his call sign? And she did not even know that you could do that kind of thing. So it took her less than a week, I think, to to become the call sign of her dad, and she really appreciates that. Of course, sending your call into the ARRL to be listed in the silent key column. They also will mark you as a life member if you're one, and especially if you're a veteran, they'll also mark you that way as well. I've actually got a binder here. Problem is it keeps getting bigger and bigger with the obituaries of ham friends of mine, and usually I'm able to find them in that silent key column that'll come up sometime in the next year or so afterwards. And that just sort of helps me remember my friends fondly by going through that book every once in a while. You probably have an account on qrz.com. Your page there can note that you've become a silent key, for example. But having said that, your family has to have access to that account. So that goes back to, where do you keep your passwords? Where do you keep your accounts that will be available to your family once you do become a silent key? You probably have envelopes, not so much anymore, but you might have envelopes at a QSL bureau. Probably need to let them know that you don't need the cards anymore. There's a lot of hobby email reflectors. My list of groups.io groups grows every day as I subscribe to, I don't know, all sorts of esoteric ham radio kind of groups. And then there's probably lots of other ham group relationships that you've established where that organization should probably know that you've become a silent key. Next slide. All right, we've talked about what to do for your own family, but what about helping other families? Most of what we just talked about applies, and if that person who became a silent key have done all of the things that we just talked about, it should be easy. But the thing that's not easy is helping one of these families. You have to be willing to help, and not everybody can do this, but it's very, very rewarding, by the way, but it takes a long time. A family's periods of grief may vary. You could be that friend that had that meeting with the ham and his family ahead of time, where you documented a plan on how to divest them of all of that equipment. Establishing trust with that family is really important so that they know that you're there to take care of the ham radio part of the estate. And we've bolded this next bullet here: involve yourself only, and I underline and tell you that you only want to be involved with the ham radio part of someone's estate. If you get involved in anything else, unless you happen to be in a position or you're part of the family or whatever that's involved in things other than ham radio stuff, you really want to avoid getting drawn into any of that, because it can really be problematic. The family really needs to know that this will take time. You have to figure out, well, where are you going to store all this stuff? Are you going to take it away? Are they going to keep it there? As I said, periods of grief will vary. It could be a year before you actually get into helping them with that estate. And families may not know what the stuff is worth, or on the other hand, they may have unrealistic expectations of what some of that stuff may be worth. Kevin already mentioned this. You got to figure out, well, what is salvageable? Old equipment carcasses, used coax and connectors, outdated components, especially electrolytic capacitors that are starting to leak all over the place. All of that stuff can just simply be done away with. But there may be some things that can be recycled. Old papers, old logbooks. Actually, I probably wouldn't get rid of those too soon. But QSL card collections, there are people who actually will take a QSL card collection. Look, I think there may be one or two in the QST classifieds in the back, but you can find them online as well. And then simply decide how you are going to proceed with doing away with or divesting them of the equipment. Next slide, please. Once again, make sure that they know that this is going to take time. Let me make a special comment about towers and antennas. Some hams, me included, have had good luck with announcing to the world that I've got a tower and an antenna on top of it. We're moving, and I need to get rid of it. You take it down, and you can have it. And we actually did that with a 52-foot crank-up tower and a TH7 on top of it. Having said that, a family who's got towers in the backyard really needs to remember liability insurance. If you just have a bunch of hams come over and somebody gets hurt, they could be really in a pickle for having to cover that. So it may very well prove to be much more efficient to have somebody come in, a tower company, and take that thing down and take it away. A lot of the things helping the family are the same things that you can do in terms of selling equipment, auctions, consignment, hamfests for sale lists. If there's somebody in your club who's good at technical kinds of stuff, have them check out the equipment to make sure that it's operational. I just got done doing that last week for a couple of HF transceivers, made sure they were working correctly, and then gave them back to the person who'd purchased them from a Silent Key estate for sale later on. And also, don't forget that sometimes non-working equipment is something that some people want because they know that they can fix something, for example. But having said that, you have to set the price accordingly. You want to maximize the return for the family, but if you set prices too high, for example, you may never sell the piece of equipment. So tell the family, hey, I'm going to try and sell this thing just the same way I would if I were at a ham fest, for example. Next slide. Finally, something nice you can do for the family is gather up some of the stuff that was important to them. I'm using my wife here. Hopefully, she's probably chagrining right now down on her laptop. Gathering up things that were important to them, articles that they may have written or appeared in, picture them operating. Here she is contesting away, and collect it all into a binder or something appropriate and present it to the family at the time so that they can remember what it was like and how important the ham radio hobby was to their loved one. And that about wraps it up for me. Kevin, back to you. No, not yet. Are you prepared? When will you become a Silent Key? Have you made it as easy as possible for your family? The time to get ready is now, and that's the bottom line. So hopefully you'll do that. Hopefully tonight we've given you some things to think about. You never know how much time you've got. And now my time is up, and I'm really going to go back to Kevin.
No, that's awesome, Dino. Thanks so much for your leadership in this and preparing so much of this. I'll take credit for a couple of things in the presentation, but Dino has done a huge amount of work in this space, supporting fellow hams and making himself available to do a presentation like this. And when we wanted to do something like this for our membership and for hams, honestly, I couldn't think of somebody better to reach out to do that. And so, with that, I'll say thanks again, Dino, and to Toby for letting us borrow a little bit of time from you and spend that time with Dino tonight. For those who are on, if you have some questions, feel free to start thinking about them. I'll put out to you that my contact information is right here on this slide. So feel free to reach out to me directly. development@arrl.org is the general inbox where any member of my team can help to support you as well. Christina, who's on here helping us moderate in the background, which I appreciate her joining us this evening as well and sharing the corrected link. So if anybody wanted to actually click on it here during the meeting, you can go right there to the Q&A where you can post a question and download your own copy of the estate planning workbook. If you registered for the webinar today, which I imagine that you did since you're on with us now, I plan to send a physical copy of it to you. You included your call sign with your registration, so I know how to find you. So we'll send you a copy of it. If for some reason you don't want a copy or whatever, just let me know, but I'll send one out to you anyway. And my only ask of you is to use it. And then I guess two asks is to use it and to share it with another ham or a club as well, to let them know that the resource is available. I can't evangelize enough the value of putting a resource like this together. So I'll pause for a minute, see if Dino has another thought or two that he wants to share. But if not, I'll open it up for questions that that others may have. Steve, I just saw you posted a note in the chat. You should be able to find that link over in Q&A, but I'll see if I can copy and paste it over into the chat window, as well, so that you don't have to find it in another spot. Feel free to. There you are. Christina already did it. She's ahead of me, which is expected. All right, I'll pause here for just for a minute. We'll stay on for just another second while folks think of any questions. If not, I definitely appreciate everybody's time joining us today.
And thank you, Kevin, for giving me the opportunity to share some of this experience. It's very fulfilling, and but it's not for everybody. It's not easy, and it takes a long time. So think about how you would want your family to be treated, and think about helping other folks. I will make a note about your club. Your club should either have maybe an informal or maybe even a formal committee that is prepared to help fellow members of the club when they suddenly become a silent key or are diagnosed with a terminal illness or something like that. I tried really hard to get our club to do it formally, but I just never was able to for some reason. Having said that, whenever we've had a silent key come up, someone has always raised their hand and joined the fray and helped take care of the families. So anyway.
That's awesome. Hams helping hams. Speaking of raising hands, I saw Ron Glass has his hand up. Ron, I'm gonna enable the mic for you, and you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question when ready. I'll pause here.
Okay, can you hear me there?
So we can hear you.
Okay, super. Thanks for the information. After having done a lot of these silent key estates, this is all very good information. I really appreciate it. Is it okay for us to share this with the club, the recording, the audio recording, or do you only want to do this live for club things?
No, great question. Actually, the ARRL letter comes out tomorrow, and our PR coordinator, who our PR manager who does this for us, is actually planning on including that link. And so feel free, once I close this and that link comes available, it should be shareable. I may want to try to edit up. Dino and I were talking in preparation as this was getting started, and maybe even some of the Q&A. But long and short of it, no pride in authorship on this. Please make sure it's available for those. And I'll put another plug out there, Ron. It's one thing to sit through the recording. It's another thing to have an opportunity to have a conversation. Anybody that wants to talk to me privately or individually about their own personal situation, or if you'd like me to join you at a club meeting, especially virtually, is pretty easy to do. So let me know how I can be helpful. Hopefully that answers your question.
That does. Go ahead, Dino.
I was just going to say, I'm available. I've done it by Zoom. I've done it in person for clubs. KLØS@ARRL.net. Just give me a shout, and I'd be happy to join you for this same presentation.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm here in the Billings, Montana area, so we have a pretty active club here. So one suggestion I would give that I've learned over the years is that this is not an activity that needs to be done strictly by the old-time hams, even though it helps to have some old-time hams because they know what the stuff is. But we have found it very beneficial to have the newer hams along to kind of see the equipment and kind of learn more about the hobby, before they got into the hobby. So it's a good way to kind of involve the newer hams into the club too.
That's a great thought, Ron, and a good thought for them to be thinking about a plan as well. There might not be as much to consider, or life is different, but everybody sort of needs to have a plan as well. So good thought on involving them and helping with others, and then also for themselves to be thinking introspectively about their own plan.
I will include that in my next presentation, as a matter of fact. Thank you very much, Ron.
You bet. No problem. Thanks.
Saw a note in the chat from Paul. He was asking anything to mention about inventory for insurance purposes or using the same list for the estate. And I'll just say shortly, I think that list actually can be used for both. There may be some requirements depending on how you're insuring, and if it's the ARRL insurance, I think they'll actually appreciate you having prepared that list and do that. But Dino, you may have done. You're the meticulous one with all those lists. You may have done something similar. Any advice on your end?
Yeah, keeping a list of everything. when I was a second lieutenant eons ago when dinosaurs walked the earth, I started keeping a list of everything, much to my wife's chagrin, because every time she buys a book, I have to log it into our plan. So yeah, keeping a list of that can really help. Insurance companies are really funny about that kind of stuff, especially for things that are more expensive. A Collins 75A4 may not really be important to XYZ insurance company. So listing it ahead of time, sometimes with collectibles, especially, sometimes insurance companies will or will not insure or pay for things that are damaged, for example. But having the list is the first step.
There's a question over in the chat this time from Jim. He was asking about password managers, and I have one or two that I could probably share. But Dino, do you want to share any thoughts you might have on something like that?
Yeah, I'm really old school. I keep them electronically in a list, and I've not gotten into password managers. So back to you.
No problem. I'll just say that there's one that I've been using for a while personally, OneSafe, OneSafe 5, and there's a plus version. There's myriad others. What I would be advising you to think about from a security standpoint is something that has on-device encryption, for it. And if you're using an Apple device, they do have a Apple Cloud keychain on there that's has encryption as well and shares it to other devices. What I would say though is that what you might use for like keychain and that might not be where you want to store all of your most things that are related to your finances and other things there. I think it's a very much a personal preference thing. But those are some ideas anyway. And so I'm seeing Marilyn saying tech support, son who's in tech support at UCSD recommends LastPass. So look into that one in your exploration of password managers. Since we had referenced passwords, though, especially related to a silent key situation, being able to get in to the password storage tool is important as well. So mentioning where the instructions are and what the requirement would be to do that would be something you would want to think about as well. So that's interesting, a little segue, but I think it's absolutely appropriate. Thanks, Jim, for the initial question and Marilyn for the advice on it. I'll stick around for another minute. Any other questions, just pop in, raise a hand, post it to any one of the chats or the Q&As. I'm bouncing around. That's no problem.
It might be interesting. I don't know, not sure how you would do it because I'm not familiar with Microsoft Teams, but how many people in the audience have actually been involved in helping out with a silent key estate? Maybe
yeah, that'd be great to ask. Anybody want to raise hands? If you know how to click the raise hand button, you could do that. All right, I'm seeing 2 so far, 3, 4.
Good for you all.
Thanks all. Good to know, Dino. And Dino mentioned about including something that came up in a question in a future presentation. I would extremely value your thoughts and reactions to today's presentation, things that we did well or other things you would have liked to have seen or anything else. I would be happy to incorporate that into future presentations I'm doing. Dino is making a great effort as a volunteer in doing this in a couple of different iterations, and it sounds like he's interested too. So either offline afterwards or whatever, I'm open to that feedback. So thank you for all of you that raised your hand and helping out with some estates and your experience and helping us to form these slides, and the next iteration of the estate planning workbook would be helpful. So I see, Bruce, you had your hand up. You just lowered it, though. Maybe you didn't have a question. That's fine. If there's no more, I'm happy to close the meeting here. Oh, Bruce, you do have a question. Let me see if I can unmute you. All right, Bruce, you should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I did participate in a very large estate for a close friend here in Vermont, and almost everything that was distributed from the estate was either done at a by invitation for people to come to the home or taken to a ham fest. Both events involved cash. And I felt nervous and wanted to create a paper trail so there was no further discussion down the road. So when I did get the cash and everything went to the surviving family member, I took the cash to the bank and got a bank check for it, and handed the bank check to the survivor of the family. Therefore, there was a paper trail that I could rely on if needed. I have not had to rely on that, but at least there's a trail involving the money.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Thank you for bringing that up. You should keep good records of what you do, what you sell. And the other thing is, you shouldn't, if it takes a year or it takes 2 years, you shouldn't wait until the end to provide the proceeds to the family. If you can sell a few pieces of equipment and you realize X number of dollars, you may do what he just said and provide that to the family at that point in time. I've had really good luck having actually a ham fest in my garage selling equipment for, we have a big garage, for Silent Key stuff. And we just, as a matter of fact, we just did that just a couple of weeks ago. So, but that's a good point.
It took over about a year and a half. Every time there was a sale of equipment, the money got to the family within a few days.
Good, great.
That's awesome. And then good to hear that you're in Vermont, Bruce. I spent about 17 years up in Northfield, Vermont at about Norwich University there. So good to hear a Vermonter on the line. Any other questions from the group? Right. Let me check the chat. I see a thanks come in. I think that first thanks is the motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
It's moved and seconded. Dino, again, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody here for joining us and for all the great questions. A link will get shared with you once I close the meeting and it does its little preparation thing. And you'll get a link to the recording. And again, it'll go out in the ARRL letter hopefully tomorrow afternoon. So thanks again for joining. I'll sign off for now and wish you all the best and very 73.